Well, the time's come for social media to be challenged in a heavy way. Bill C-34 would lock everyone under 16 out of social media and check the age of every Canadian to do it. We have a really fun panel today. We have Wyatt, Sharpe, Elie, and Ashley joining me, and I'm excited to chat with you all about it. So let's just kind of start with sort of what the bill is. Wyatt, can you give me a quick rundown, just high level? What is this? What do people need to know about it? Hit us.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Digital Safety Act, and a number of things in the bill would aim to regulate different parts of the internet in terms of digital online safety and the online harms kind of component of things, as the government has described. So, one component of that is AI regulation and trying to prevent against things like AI deepfakes. But perhaps the most notable part, and the reason we're all here today, is because of the part of the bill that aims to ban social media for those under the age of 16, really taking kind of a page out of the playbook from Australia and Denmark, and now we're even starting to see other countries, the likes of which include the UK, really start to kind of jump on the bandwagon here and do this. And of course, you have a number of people, as I'm sure we'll get into, who are really questioning the effectiveness of whether or not this would actually be possible.
Well, I'm glad that you sort of brought up other countries because, like you said, Australia was sort of the first people to come out and do this, and they seem to always be to do stuff like this. And then, of course, a lot of other countries and areas follow suit. Ashley, this doesn't just include 16 and under, but also now every Canadian, as I understand it, would have to submit their age and verify their age. What are your thoughts on that and some of the conversations you've had with people?
Yeah, it's really that digital literacy strategy, right? Like if we're looking at the duty of care when it's collecting our information, I think that's why many Canadians might be hesitant. I think that it's great that maybe we haven't gone first in this space because it lets us kind of see where these other countries may have fallen short of these regulations and ways that we can kind of bolster working together with other countries to push these companies for these safe guards that really haven't been there in the first place. So I think we can take a little bit from, seeing what other people have done first and really trying to push for those regulations where it makes sense. And that's just what we're kind of seeing roll out right now in this wild, wild west type
Elie,
space
one of
right
the
now.
things that I did hear is if platforms are, I think Ottawa came out with this, that if platforms can prove adequate in quotations, because I don't know what adequate means, safeguards, then
I
they
don't
may
think
not be
anybody does.
subject. You're right. Thank you, Wyatt. You're right. I don't think anybody knows what adequate means. Elie, what are your sort of thoughts are on adequate safeguards and if that's even reasonable to sort of talk about?
Well, we don't know a lot about this bill because basically the a lot of the decisions will be made by an unelected body once it passed. This whole bill is a Trojan horse of online censorship because yes, there's a social media ban for kids, but beneath it are a bunch of new internet regulations, the creation of this so-called Digital Safety Commission, which is the most Orwellian thing I've ever heard, which would go and regulate social media, but also regulate AI chatbots so that basically the answers that it gives you would be answers that would not foment hatred. And there was the Canadian Constitution Foundation, Christine Van Geyn has the show on this network. She asked AI, what are some of the answers that could potentially be impacted by, or questions that could be impacted by the type of answers it releases. And it's things like, well, what are the different crime rates within racial groups? Or what's the reasons for the racial disparities in incarceration rates? Questions regarding gender, does DEI work, etc. The answers that the AI may give you may start changing on the idea of not wanting to foment hatred. So the whole thing is goes much beyond just social media for kids, and it goes to regulating the internet in the name of safety. But the big concern is that in the name of safety, we may start censoring information that is politically incorrect in under the guise of, well, we don't want people to look at these facts that could foment hatred.
Well, I think that normally, I mean, censorship is always going to be a concern anytime the government sort of comes out and tries to defend something. But, why I just find this interesting. You only have about 20 seconds, but as somebody who really launched their career at just 11 years old on social media, how do you feel about this?
I mean, I think the basics in terms of the psychological impact, no one is disputing that. What people are disputing is the effectiveness of this. We mentioned Australia. When you look to Australia, young people are finding a number of loopholes and leave it to a young person to find the most effective loophole in terms of VPNs, in terms of lying about their age. So again, I think the government's merits might be in the right place in terms of addressing this, but this is really not going to be effective, and it's going to cost money in terms of its administrative enforcement that will lead to just be kind of a big waste in the long run.
Okay, appreciate it. Well, more to come on this as we have 3 more segments. Stay tuned for further information.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
Continuing our conversation on this bill that censors, or as we're discussing, censors social media conversations for 16-year-old and under, really talking about is driving a youth mental health crisis. Is that the thing that we're seeing social media considerably impact? Now, the science is definitely louder than it is settled. So I want to sort of throw this over to Ashley. Ashley, as a parent yourself, you certainly have some views on social media, I'd imagine. I'm sure your kids use social media. But would you have appreciated this bill for your children and some of the stuff that maybe they saw at below 16 years old on social media that you didn't want them to see?
Yeah, we're in a tricky position because I have a 13-year-old and I've got an almost 15-year-old. So really with this ban and their friends talking about what does this mean for them, a lot of their sports teams communicate this way through Snapchat and other forms. So it's kind of Pandora's box. Once you've already allowed them on these apps, I know as a parent, you're constantly being a detective. You're trying to see what's happening with the algorithm. You're trying to see what kind of videos are being pushed. And the chatbots were prompting the kids to make friends and have conversations with them. So I kind of saw this all kind of play out firsthand in my household, but I think that comes back to parenting and also having those open dialogues. But it would be great if, the onus was on those big tech companies to not allow those persuasive bots per se. You know what I mean? For them to kind of cue the kids to manipulate them to want to continue to click and add and do snap streaks or all those kinds of things that are very addictive, and that kind of sensory attention and that dopamine hit. So at the same time, yeah, there should be more safeguards, and we saw that with the
we talk about the safeguards, and I think that's valid. We'll get into that in the next segment.
Sam, can I just say something really
Yeah.
quickly? I want to so I had a conversation with a psychology professor at the University of Toronto, and Ashley mentioned it, which is what kind of sparked this in my mind. And that is when you have young people who have pre-existing access to some of these platforms, it's almost the same thing when it comes to alcohol. And that is, if people don't have access to it, in the case of alcohol, till they're 19, in the case of this ban, till they're 16, they're going to go from having no access to having completely unfeathered access. And the professor's name was Dr. Jay Olson. And what he said to me was that the psychological effects of going from having no access to unfeathered access, as this ban theoretically would propose, would be just as damaging, if not more damaging, than some of the effects of young people just having access to social media from the get-go. So I just kind of think that's important to really kind of underscore, because it doesn't kind of align with the reasoning that the government has been using to kind of justify why this ban is necessary.
I actually really appreciate you bringing that up. One of the thoughts that I had sort of around this bill was the idea that, I mean, we were also, there was a time when kids grew up without social media, which younger people don't see today. We were fine without it. Kids they found other ways to use their time. Even when I think about some of the things like, for example, how Snapchat actually prompts you to talk to their Snapchat AI friend. I mean, Ashley, you can't possibly tell me that you're comfortable with your kid at 11:30 at night, grabbing his phone and talking to an AI bot, and that AI bot sort of like manipulating his feelings. I want to open it up to the floor here. We only have about 1:30 left in this segment, but you guys talk a lot about free speech, and I think that that's a valid point. But what about when free speech is sort of manipulated through the algorithms and the echo chambers that kids below the age of 16 see? Does that then not encourage a more despair society for younger people, especially just being fed their own opinions, not really encouraging them to think critically about some of these subjects?
Well, how can people think critically if these search results are manipulated in the name of quote unquote reducing harm?
But they're already, hold on, Elie, they're already manipulated, though, to
Yeah.
feed what you want to see. So wouldn't it be better to at least cut that off entirely? Like, even if it's a safeguard to say there's no recommendation of
So
algorithm?
how would that work? How would that work?
No
Because
autoplay, no infinite scrolling, no.
I mean, yeah, just to kind of go to what Sam's saying, like I think right now part of the problem, and as against this bill as I am for the point of the social media ban, part of the problem that maybe we can get into, and part of the reason social media is so addictive is because of the nature of some of the algorithms. And so I think in the case of the government, if they were to put their same efforts that they are into this ban into actually making companies regulate their algorithms, which to Elie's point, I think he's kind of referencing that would equate to censorship. But I think it's much better to at least regulate something than completely take it away altogether, as the government is doing. And also, again, this kind of idea of algorithms and the way in which they kind of operate on some of these platforms right now, you see not only the psychological harm, but the physical harm that some of these different things have caused, in a variety of different examples as well. So, I mean, I think regulating the algorithm can allow for people to still have access to it in safer, less harmful kind of ways.
Wyatt, thank you for that. We're going to jump into the next segment. Elie, Ashley, I'm going to throw it over to you guys because this is sort of getting into the conversation I wanted it to lead into. So stay tuned for more.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
As we continue our conversation on safeguarding or removing social media for kids under the age of 16 in Canada, Elie, I wanted to throw it over to you. I know you have some thoughts around the algorithm to continue our last discussion in the previous segment.
yeah, sure. So I run a business, a YouTube business that relies entirely on the algorithm. And something that people don't realize often about algorithm, and here I'm talking, that includes adults, but I guess it could apply to children, but I have something to add about children after, is it's not really about the algorithm more than it's about psychology. So like when I do a YouTube video, it's not the algorithm that decides whether or not I get more views, it's the audience. Is my video attractive enough to get people to click on it? And if enough people click on it, the algorithm will start showing it to more people. So what becomes concerning is when we want to start changing how the algorithm works, we risk actually suppressing content that people want to watch in the name of safety. For children, I would agree that for like kids content, if you go on YouTube, for example, when you upload a video, you always have to hit, is this for kids or not for kids? There are Instagram or Meta teen accounts, for example. I think this is where you could have some type of regulations. For example, in China, the TikTok version of China, there's a time limit on it. After a certain amount of time, the phone tells the kids, okay, that's enough, put your phone down, right? So there's things you can do on that end. But I'm 100% against any changes to the algorithm of adult users, because what this does risk is it risks shadow banning and silencing Canadian voices who are using it effectively, because we've decided in the name of safety, we're not going to promote independent channels or people who know how to use psychology correctly, and say we're just going to put CBC and CTV in their face every day.
I can certainly see that point. Ashley, has there been a situation in which you've seen your kids be influenced by the algorithm that recommends things that they just want to watch?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, especially in my son's age group, those, teen boys pushing peptides, pushing, the idea of these sports cars and not going to post-secondary school, being entrepreneurs, looks maxing, all those things, and trying to have those conversations to really instill those values that we always have as a household of, what it means to be an individual, and not necessarily fall prey into those things. But again, it's very persuasive. It's very manipulative, especially when your peers are liking it, or they see how many views something has liked, and trying to explain it's a digital footprint. So anything you're liking or resharing can follow you throughout your entire lifetime. And that's really hard to get that across, even if we're saying it on a daily basis.
Well, certainly, there's the argument, like if you eliminate it, they'll just find another way to get around it. And I mean, we are seeing this from Australia, a couple months after.
70% of kids in Australia have gotten around the ban. That's how ineffective it is.
So it wouldn't surprise me. But in that way, can we agree that there needs to be some form of increased safeguard? I imagine we all can. But then the question becomes, and I'd like to lean on this in this discussion as well as in the next segment, like, what are those safeguards? And I actually want to talk about substantial changes versus us just saying, oh, well, it's a complex issue. Wyatt, what do you feel are some, viable safeguards, especially because I mean, you grew your entire career off social
Mhm.
media and doing interviews, and you wouldn't have really been able, well, you wouldn't have been able to do that if you were,
Yeah.
if this ban was in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, the parents need to be involved. I think part of the reason this bill is so attractive to parents in particular is because it allows them to kind of put the onus of controlling their kids' social media usage so that they don't have to be the ones to kind of, come down as the gorilla saying you can't use these types of technologies. So I think in the case of parents, it requires a lot of leadership from them. And I think if you kind of break this down into three different categories, you have the parents and family regulation, you have platforms, and then you have the government. And so if you look at the government, I think what we've kind of acknowledged here, the three of us, is that the government can't really regulate it in a super effective way because of the loopholes. And it's just not really something that can be done systemically in a widespread kind of fashion. Whereas if you look to platforms combined with parents and in kind of incorporating the two of those together, there are a number of pre-existing rules and regulations on social media when it comes down to you need to be 13 and older. That's something that many platforms require. There's a number of rules in terms of sensitive content and preventing sensitive content for those who are under the age of 18. So I think with platforms kind of working and consulting with parents and young people to maybe include more of those types of rules, you can get to a point where the internet and these platforms are safer instead of turning to the government to just say, let's put in place a widespread ban that's going to treat everybody the same, when very clearly there are some strong differences between people.
I really value that take. Elie, Ashley, I'm going to come back to you guys just after the next segment here to complete some full thoughts. But when we come back, the part I care about most, which is not necessarily the ban, but as we're discussing, what is it specifically? Stay tuned for more.
I'ma rule the world, I'ma rule the world, yeah.
We can all agree that we need to instill more safeguards into children using social media under the age of 16. However, maybe banning it isn't the right way to do it. Ashley, I want to throw it over to you as a mom, but as somebody who also uses social media quite often. Where do you really see some of these safeguards needing to be taken place?
Definitely when you're entering the age, there's workarounds. I can put parental controls all day long, but there's going to be a way that the kids will find out a password, or like Wyatt said, a VPN. There's apps that they can download that are free that would allow them that access, and so it's undetectable. So really, like, I understand that we need to balance innovation here in Canada, but also wanting those safeguards. And so when we're talking about compliance, it really is for those big tech companies. It's really trying to find a way that if they see that there's something harmful, pornographic, violent, that it's not accessible for children to view. And I think it's just flagging those certain aspects. If they see certain things or suicidal thoughts or anything that they see typed, that's a flag right away, and that account can be shut down.
Elie, just to throw it over to you, would love some of your thoughts on safeguards. Where do you sort of see this
On
position?
safeguard, well, I will say it was revealed through different lawsuits that social media companies were complicit in creating addictive social media content for kids, rather. So obviously, I think
Well, they do it for adults already.
right?
They intentionally create
No,
addictive content
but
for
I mean,
adults.
this is where I mean, like, if the company was literally making it and designing it to be addictive for kids, then it should simply be, well, don't do that, right? Like, I think this is where, the onus should be for more responsible practices, right? That most of these companies, the CEOs don't even let their own kids on the platform, and yet we let all of our kids on those platforms. But I do think a lot of it does have to come down to the individual parent. It was kind of noted here, like, I think there's a lot of parents that like this bill because it's like it takes something off their back. Parents have to be a bit stricter. I spoke to Jonathan Haidt a year ago. He's a well-known psychologist, wrote some best-selling books, and he supports, and this is where we may disagree, he supports a legislative ban. But something else he said, no phones before high school. Kids do not need smartphones. If you need to reach your child, get them an Apple Watch that has a SIM card in it. You can call and you can text. That's good enough. I think, honestly, like, everything has a pro and a con to it, and the cons of regulating the internet, especially when it comes to shutting down independent media, shutting down how Canadians can express themselves online, implementing digital ID, which you're going to have to do if you want to verify age. That creates serious privacy implications for everybody. These are all pretty big downsides. So I think it starts with better practices on just the social media side, and also parents, there's some responsibility here. I think most parents wouldn't let their kids smoke or drink, and I think they have to start viewing social media the same way.
I see your point on the idea of it sort of leading to worse things. However, if we're just talking about banning for under 16, I know you spoke to Jonathan Haidt, and I appreciate bringing him up because I had him in my notes here, but I think it's fair to say that, social media in a lot of capacity makes it very challenging for parents to actually moderate what their children are seeing and really just raising their children in a good way. Because if they're not going to see it from the parents and they're going to see it from some other young kid, they're going to see it from a hockey change room. God knows what happens in there. Like, there's just a lot of areas in which it can be seen. But Wyatt, just to throw it over to you, sort of, where could you see, as somebody who really benefited off social media at a really early age, where could you see some of these safeguards being realistic? Propose some to me now in about 30 seconds here.
Well, I mean, going back to what I said before, it comes down to the platforms themselves implementing things like further bans on sensitive content. Even if I think to something like X, formerly known as Twitter, the kind of platform itself now, going back to the algorithms that we were talking about before, the content that it kind of pumps out and that it shows you on your recommended feed is very different than what it was before someone like Elon Musk took it over, which kind of underscores the level of control that these platforms have over what you actually see on them. And so I think, again, it comes down to the platforms, and frankly, because of the profit incentives, these platforms aren't going to, regulate themselves. And so from this point, this is where the government can come in, and this is where the government can say, as a platform, you need to put in place more measures to ensure that the internet can be used in safer, less harmful ways without banning it altogether.
Wyatt, Ashley, Elie, thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure, and have a wonderful night. If you disagreed with anything, we want to hear from you. Join the conversation at My Generation on all socials. And with that, we'll end off with this. Do not simply accept what you are told. Challenge your thinking, engage in differences, and listen to new perspectives.
I'ma rule the world, yeah.